Okay, good evening. Good evening. There we go. I think that's better. And good evening to those who may be with us online from a live stream. Hello. And I know there were some folk who said they couldn't, make it tonight, but that's okay. We have another week, and we certainly, have a way to communicate with people to get information that we need to them. So, did everybody get the packet before coming in the lobby? Okay, so that'll be important. And before we begin, I want to say something that's used a lot in, whether it's 12-step programs or anywhere else where there may be some discussion. And we're going to, open up to see if somebody wants to share about what their healthy grieving goals were in a couple seconds. So I wanted to read this. It says that as we start this journey or continue this journey together, there's some guidelines, so everyone's welcome to participate, right? That's for sure, welcome. But no one has to, right? You may choose to speak or not, or to share. Both this week and next week, there'll be opportunities for maybe to give some feedback or to share something of what you wrote. Agree to expect opinions of others here. I don't think we're doing anything controversial that somebody say, I don't agree with that. But if you don't agree with somebody on that, then keep that to yourself. Confidentiality, of course, is a priority. We said, what is said in this group remains in this group, right? What happens in Phoenixville stays in Phoenixville, something like that. No gossip. Everyone fairly shares the airspace. No one takes up all the time, and everyone allows, others to share. So, again, this may not apply exactly to what we're doing, but it does apply. And please turn your cell phone off if you haven't done that already, or on to vibrate or whatever. So, and please don't text or surf, I guess it says during the meeting, and respects others and listen. Okay, and I want to repeat again what we said before, and that's that as we go through the material, you may experience some type of past memory or something that will come to you that will make you feel upset, and please feel to take time to yourself. Go out, get some water. If you really need somebody, one of us, or I know, Ren, I'm sure would love to share with anybody. He's out in the lobby. If somebody wants to just sit and share with, say, about why I was really upset, somebody pray with him, you can do that. Your emotional health, all our emotional health is very important. So we just wanted to make sure to share that. Okay, so I want to begin tonight's time together by looking at the healthy grieving goals. So if hopefully you brought that with you in your blue folder from last week. So get out your healthy grieving goals sheet. Again, those at home, hopefully you had a chance to print that out somehow this week or got them to you otherwise. And I know Linda brought some to some of the folk from her church. So look at that healthy grieving goals. And so I want to ask you, did you establish any goals? Anybody? Take the time to do that? Did anybody, if anybody did, does anybody want to read one that they had? Please, Laurie.
I really was thinking about this week, examining my life and thinking about different things that maybe are still bothering me that I had just tried to push down. And you were talking about pushing down. And so that's what I really been doing this week, just doing the examination.
Okay.
Anything further, but just thinking about different things in my life.
Okay. So in essence, that was a goal, that I'm going to examine. Good. Does somebody else raise their hand here? Julie, yes. Okay. Yes. Yep. Very good. That one, as I said before, I used to do this a lot with when I was in hospice. And I would do it off with staff persons or or people who were, in the caregiving field. And that was the thing that everybody said, I'm in this field because I give, but I have a hard time receiving. Thank you. Anyone else? A goal that they had? Well, I would encourage you to continue to look at that as you go forward. And as we said, there's some helps to that, one of which was that, and I'll ask you to get that out now, if you would, the Am I a Healthy Griever checkup. Sure. Yes, thank you. So that's what we're going to go over tonight. Yeah, so it's hard to have a goal on something you don't know what it is. But when this was written, it was written for the whole manual being in somebody's hands, now that we've broken it up. And I'll say this now, we had hoped to have the manual here tonight. That was the plan. But the printer was not able to get it done in time. So in the beginning of this week, we'll have them for next week, but we copied off the sheets for that. So a little later on in the program, I guess you say, those worksheets, the SAG section, and then next week we'll do the Journey of Healing and go over that, and they'll be part of what you can do for the examining. So taking a look at this Am I Healthy Griever checkup sheet. So again, I'm not going to go over everything, but if you haven't had a chance to do this, I really encourage you to do this because it can be a help for the goals. Obviously those things that you have low numbers on, that's an indication of the possibility of making a goal, out of that area or looking a little further into that. Now, we call it a checkup on purpose because you have this sheet. Now, you're going to get a manual. And in the manual, there'll be another checkup, like this is a part of it. And we're going to suggest, in 6 months or a year, I don't know, you can decide. A year might be a good time because then you have time to really work on things in between. But maybe the next October, on the year anniversary of your healthy grieving training, do it again. Like any other checkup. When the doctor says come back in 6 months or come back in a year, we're going to take a look at that again. So we encourage you to do that. But what I wanted to do now is just and hopefully there's growth in that. The lower numbers will be moving up, right? Excuse me. Now, to step into our teaching tonight, I want to talk about 2 of the healthy grieving tasks. They're very critical. And those tasks are the inviting and the examining. They're very critical. And they're probably the most active or proactive of the 6 tasks in terms of something to really make a commitment to actually do something with. So I want to take a look at examining first, and I want to look at number 11. So the slide. So as you can see there, the question is, I have spent time seeking to gain a better understanding of my inner thoughts and feelings. So I don't know if you have your sheet in front of you. Did you fill that out? Anybody? Okay. Does anybody? What did you come up with? Did anybody feel confident or want to share what their response was to that? Number 8. Okay. So that's, and you're saying you're doing, as earlier you said, doing more of that. Many people say, I don't like to be inside my own head too much. I hear that a lot from people. I don't like to, just like I said last week, I don't want to live in the past. Yes. No. It's the Am I a Healthy Griever checkup. Yeah, and it's got number 11 is the question. Yes, please. Okay. Oh, okay, okay, good. Oh, okay, all right, good, good. You know, it's interesting to say that because that's one of the suggestions was to keep the same sheet and then when doing it again later, you know, do something different, you know, maybe use a different color or something, you know, to mark the different year or time. But that's good to you know, where we were and where we're going. Very good. Okay, next slide. So I happen to be a fan of Billy the Bard, as I call him, technically William Shakespeare. So I love Shakespeare, and I just came across this sonnet just this past month when I was away for a couple days, and I had not really seen it before. And it begins by saying, "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past." And then if you have a chance, you can go look at the rest of the sonnet later, but it's very powerful. And the whole idea of catch-up mourning that we've been talking about, you know, in that sonnet, he, you know, deals with that, not in that terminology, but in that way. And that's really what we're talking about with this examining, you know, bringing up and remembering, and as you'll see tonight, later, using a particular tool to do that with. Number 12 there says, "I have come to recognize many of the things that trigger my emotions." I don't think I have a slide for that, no. Trigger my emotions. And again, it's just another way of in some sense, what they would call that emotional intelligence, you know, being aware of what's going on inside of us. And again, some people say, "I don't like to do that," or "That's why I don't like country music, because they talk so much about, you know, sad things," or something about that. The worksheets that we're going to look at tonight are really designed, or the one actually, we decided we're going to wait to do the next one next week. The worksheet we're going to look at tonight is designed to help us to get in more touch with that, you know, and for those who are not only doing this for yourself, but with the intention of going further with somebody else. You know, as a healthy grieving encourager, as we talked about, you know, keep in mind that these are things that you can use with somebody else, that you can then ask them maybe to fill that out. You know, these worksheets and the other things, especially the grief experience survey might be a good one for someone, if you're going to be meeting with them, to share with them, or right as you sit with them, say, you know, I want to take a couple minutes to fill this out, and then we can talk about that. You know, so that's one of the reasons the tools are there to be used. Okay, next slide, please. So invite is the next one. All right. Hold on one second. My bad. So invite is one of the critical because it's so helpful to share with another person, you trust. You know. So number 8 was a question especially connected to that. I am not afraid to ask for help and support, and have done so in the past. Did anybody have a number on that, or would like to share with us anything about what they had on that? Please. Okay. All right. There you go. So you've already looking back and reflecting and seeing. And you know what? My numbers might be the same. You know, if I looking back in years too, yeah, I realized, last week I mentioned starting my journey of healing in 2004 when I went to that seminar. You know, that radically changed how I was open to receive and examine and invite and the like. So, very, very good. Okay, next slide, please. So again, those terms, emotional intelligence and grief intelligence, you know, it's really important. Emotional intelligence, we might say, is being aware of our own and others' emotions, you know, as they express them, you know, to not miss cues. You know, I dressed tonight not for fashion, but I themed dressed. So I picked up this shirt. You might not be able to see it. You can look at it later. But it's all little different faces. And they've all got a different feeling attached to it, you know. And when I used to wear this at seminars, I used to come in and I used to say, now it's not good to poke people, but with your pencil very carefully, poke which one of them fits you tonight. And a lot of the nurses were there that, you know, and they had a rough day and they said, exhausted, you know, whatever. So, but grief intelligence is said here. I got a fuller definition here, and this is an addiction. This is not a dictionary definition. This is what we call our working definition. It's an understanding of how grief experiences, of how our disappointments, our trials, and our losses, how they can and do affect us as human beings, how they affect our mind, our body, and our spirit. And such of what our purpose was last week and tonight, especially as we're going to move into talking about trauma, is gaining this grief intelligence, this understanding about these things. And there are experts out there in our country now saying that there's a large percentage of people now who have trauma and do not realize it, you know, because they don't even recognize it. They don't know what the signs of it are. I had a heart attack 3.5 weeks ago. There were signs of it a couple days before the main sign. And I thought it was an indigester. I thought it was something else. Well, I know now better what those signs were, but I didn't know them. And a lot of people had that same thing about, you know, grief and emotional and trauma issues. So, in particular, what we want to talk about tonight, and in the manual, was knowing the difference between typical grief responses. And that would be, by typical, I mean, when every one of us as emotional beings, with the disappointments, trials, losses we have, there's a typical way in which we respond to that. And Marion's going to talk more about that as we go forward. But then there's also, traumatic grief responses, and they're very different. And it's important to know that distinction for ourselves, but also when we're dealing with somebody else. And, and watching them and listening and because we care about them. And we see some struggles in their lives, and we may be able to help them. We may be able to help them to uncover some of the things that they're dealing with. So, in the transition to talk about that, I want to now tell a little story. True story, not a personal story. And it's about World War II. And during World War II, many of you may know that the Nazis, the Nazis bombed London, right? They bombed London. And the people who lived in London, it was a treacherous thing. They never knew. The sirens go off and they had to run, get down in the underground or the subways, wherever they were, they had to hide. Well, there was issue with families. Well, what do we do? With the children, this is going to be really tough for them to be able to handle this. What do we do? So many parents had family, and either the whole family or their other relatives, they sent their children out. Many of them, actually away from their parents. They sent them out into the countryside where they'd be safe, right? And then many of the other parents kept their children with them. So after the war was over, they did studies on those children. And I forget at what point, but in just looking at their lives, talking to them, discussing things. And which children do you think would have been more traumatized? The ones living in London and not knowing when the bombs are going to come up and die in any night, or the ones safe out in the countryside? Would have what? More trauma. You're right. Because the issue was more about the family and not being with their family, So the point is, and Marion will declare that more, and this is the point, it's not the experience or the event that happens, it's our response. So, at this point, Marion's going to come up and share with us.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Glad you're back tonight. Tony just gave you a great illustration of how trauma affects people differently in all types of situations. We're going to give you a brief outline on trauma, which will include Pat speaking about the body stress response system, and Tony following with an analogy which will help to illustrate how our brain can react in stressful situations. I've been studying trauma for the past 7 years. I attained my certification as a trauma competent professional through Lakeside Global Institute, located in the Philadelphia and Montgomery counties, dedicated to creating learning environments that promote knowledge, change, growth, and hope through overcoming some of life's greatest challenges. One of the first facts I learned was you can have grief without trauma, but you can't have trauma without grief. A puzzling thing to learn right in the beginning. This manual, Becoming a Healthy Griever for Life, would not be complete without having a section on trauma. We've written about understanding trauma as traumatic grief injury, and to understand the effects of trauma on an individual, we added identifying trauma grief, how bad is your injury? We start out by learning the definition of trauma, which was developed by Dr. Bruce Purry, a leading expert in the field of trauma. He worked with a lot of the children from the Branch Davidian disaster in Texas. Trauma is defined as an experience or pattern of experiences that impairs the proper functioning of a person's stress response system, making it more reactive or sensitive. To begin to understand the difference between grief and traumatic grief injury, it helps to understand trauma as big T and little t. And I'll give you an example of that. 2 people are in a car accident together. Both are slightly injured, but each one has a totally different reaction. Person A, they view the accident as not a big deal and are grateful no one is seriously injured. Person B is very upset about the accident. Now they don't want to drive or ride in a car. They are startled by a loud noise or bang. They just want to stay home. While this is just a brief example, it's not something to make light about when people are experiencing trauma. What you may think is not a big trauma could be a big trauma for somebody else. Reactions can be similar or completely different. In the manual, we refer to trauma grief injury to distinguish it from typical grief injury. Dr. Wolfoff, which Tony talked about last week. Okay. Slide. Okay. Okay. No, I know, I got it. Who has been mentioned previously was the one who wrote that injury needs to be applied to all experiences of grief. He tells us every disappointment, trial, struggle, or loss injures us in some way, whether physically, psychologically, relationally, spiritually, or otherwise. Dr. Wolfoff believes the word disorder, such as used in the phrase as traumatic disorder, should not be called this because it's an injury, a deep wounding injury. We agree with Dr. Wolfoff and refer to traumatic grief injury and typical grief injury. In all grief and loss, typical grief loss, it brings us to acknowledge our own inadequacy and lack of strength. No matter what we did to make the person's or situation or event better, it didn't end the way we wanted it to end. Now we struggle to understand why this happened the way instead of the way we wanted it. This is when turning to the tools given in the manual to work through these feelings, thoughts, and emotions is most important to help get back on our even plane. When we talk about traumatic grief injury, our emotional reaction is more deeply embedded in our body. Our response to an event or a situation come from a part of the brain that is not governed by the rational mind. Automatic reactions that control our emotions come from neural associations within our memory networks that are independent of our higher reasoning power. I'm going to pause here so Pat can talk about the brain's response system, and then after that, Tony's going to do a brief analogy which will help to understand how the brain responds during stress, and then I'll finish up.
Good evening. Okay, slide. Have you ever taken a walk in the woods and seen something that scared you? Your body reacted, and even before you had a chance to realize what was happening, you had that yikes feeling all over. That was your stress response system at work. Here's what was going on in your body. Slide. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala, and its big job is to constantly scan your environment for danger. If it perceives anything that even might be a threat to you, it jumps into action and alerts another part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus takes that threat information and signals the adrenal glands to start to release adrenaline, which, slide, makes you more alert, you breathe faster, your senses sharpen, your heart beats faster, your oxygen levels increase, and blood gets diverted from your digestive system and sent to your muscles in your arms and legs so you can either fight or run away and deal with that threat. Next, cortisol gets secreted to help keep you in this revved up condition and to maintain the heightened physical stamina and strength that you're going to need to deal with the threat. Only then does a thinking and reasoning part of your brain, called the prefrontal cortex, get involved. Its job is to assess the threat. And this is when you realize, hopefully, that that thing over there in the shadows is not a bear, it's a tree stump. You feel a surge of relief, but it takes some time for your body to calm down and get back to normal, doesn't it? That's the way the stress response system works. But what about when your brain realizes that the threat is real? Maybe not a bear, but maybe someone fixing to rob you, or your boss harassing you, or a parent abusing you, or a natural disaster, or a tough diagnosis for you or a loved one, or demeaning and intimidating words that spring from racism or some other form of hatred. Everything that I described happens, of course, and the cortisol levels remain elevated. You might fight or run away if one of them seems like a winnable option to your brain, which has your survival as its only goal. Please note, all of these actions are involuntary. If it seems like fighting or fleeing won't help you, a third option, to freeze, may occur. In the freeze option, though you're alert, you basically don't respond at all. Your brain may be stalling for time as it tries to process what's really going on. Or maybe it wants you to try and not be noticed, kind of fade into the background, and hopefully that threat will pass right by you. In the worst case, it would want you to not fight back because it thinks that that is your best shot to stay alive. In this state, a sense of detachment could occur, and chemicals could be secreted by your body called endorphins, which would temporarily numb the pain that your brain knows you're going to feel. All of these responses are meant to help us deal with threats in the moment. Slide. And if we can and do deal with the threat in the moment, the stress response system will simmer down and return to normal. But if we don't or can't deal with the threat, our stress response system will stay revved up for a long time. And that's when these responses become unhelpful, because this can be damaging to us, damaging to our bodies, our emotions, our relationships, and our spirits. And this is what is at the core of what is called being traumatized. The good news is that if we deal with our grief and trauma, we can come out the other side of the experience even stronger and healthier than before. And that is our goal here, to help us grieve in healthy ways and to experience what is called post-traumatic growth so that we can live fully and thrive. Tony?
Okay. So, now, many of you may be, because I don't know people's backgrounds, but many of you may be comfortable following that stress response system, discussed with the technical parts of the brain. And that's important, and I didn't know that whole system. So I don't know if you do or not, but that's something, again, when you get the manual, some of this is in the manual, so take a look at that. But the others you may be sitting here saying, and half-jokingly, or jokingly saying, what's the Spanish conquistadores Cordes have to do with the brain and the stress? So, and I'd have to correct you and say, no, she said cortex, and it's in the brain. But anyway, the point is, this amazing structure that we have inside of us, that I believe God created, our Creator designed for us to either fight or flight or freeze if necessary. On that is so important. But what I wanted to do here was to give another way to help understand that, a way that, for me, came out of, it's an analogy, but came out of my background. So when I was a kid, a preteen or a teen, or a young teen, I played a lot of pinball. Anybody else ever played pinball? You got a few pinball players? Okay. I played a lot of pinball. I played a lot of pinball at Charlie's, right? So Charlie's was the joint, little luncheonette that was in the basement of an apartment building that was across the street from the elementary school. So some of you know I was an old street kid. So I had my leather jacket in 6th grade and my switchblade knife in my pocket thinking I was out of West Side Story. And I was going over and downstairs into Charlie's joint thinking I was cool and played pinball, me and Eddie Blounce. That's a shout out to Eddie Blounce, wherever he's at. So anyway, and Eddie was better than me. He was like a pinball wizard. But anyway, so there were 2 pinball machines down there, right? One right next to each other. And the one pinball machine here, right, it didn't have a whole lot of what you might call bells and whistles, There weren't a lot of places for the ball to bang around. You didn't rack up a lot of points and bigger gaps for the ball to go down. You just didn't like it as much. But you could shake it all around. And if you play pinball, if the ball's ready to come down and you can shake the machine a little bit, and then it goes off to the side, and then it doesn't go down, and you keep the ball up, right? You get more points, right? So, but something happens if you shake a machine too much. Anybody? It tilts, yeah. And depending on the machine, you either lose that ball or all the balls. The game, is completely done. And, and you lose your quarter, and a quarter was a lot back then. It's still a lot, but especially was a lot back then. So, bang that machine all around, but you just didn't get the enjoyment. You could play longer, but next to it was the better machine. The better machine. More points, more sounds, nothing like today's machines with the multi-ball where you get 7 or 8 balls coming down going at you. They didn't have multi-ball back in the 60s there. But it was, it was a fun machine. The problem with this machine, though, was very sensitive. Very sensitive. You didn't have to shake it very much and it would tilt on you, and then you'd be done. But there was one thing that was very helpful. It was very helpful. If you're looking at the machine and up where the numbers were, right to the right, there was a box, a wooden box. And inside that box was a thin piece of some type of metal, whether it was aluminum or metal, I'm not sure. But when you tilted that machine, that little pointer went like that. So it didn't say it, but we called it a tilt meter. So it went like that. But here's what we learned. Here's what we learned. Do not put your quarter in while that's still going like that. You play the other not-so-good machine, or just get a hot dog, but come back to it. Because it wasn't until it went back like that. Because if it was still going like that and you put your quarter in, it tilted even more quickly. Of course, right? Because it was in tilt mode. It was in tilt mode. And the tilt meter taught us that. So, we learned how to look at that. Well, that was the pinball machine's stress response system indicator. Right? You with me? That was its indicator. That we had given it stress by shaking it. And it was still going. And the worse you shook it, the longer it went. Sometimes you have to wait a really long time for that to happen. Before you put in that quarter in, or you would waste that quarter. Does that make sense? Well, each of us has a tilt meter inside of us. That's what our stress response system is, in a way. A tilt meter inside of us. And some of us are more sensitive or reactive than others. Slide, please. So what we need to do is to learn to recognize or listen to our own tilt meter. What is the tilt mode that we're in? Some of us are more easy emotionally hijacked mode, because that's what the mode will be in when that happens. In fact, in terms of relationships, this would be a really good thing. I was telling some out in the lobby that we had this shirt, but there was also a thing you could buy. It was a rectangle thing like this that had most of these faces on it, and it was a magnet, and you put it on your refrigerator, and then it had a little square thing the size of each one of these. So the idea was, let's say there were two people in the house, whether it was husband and wife or maybe parents and kids, whomever, however many people you had. The first one in the house would move the magnet to what they were feeling, right? So if you came home second and you said, oh, they're exhausted, they're confused, they're frustrated, they're tired, well, then you'd maybe know how to respond, right? So wouldn't it be good for us? I mean, wouldn't it be good if everybody we talked to had a tilt meter on their forehead? You could know, oh, wait a minute, let me be a little cool. Let me be a little, not bring that up right away or something like that. But it's part of that emotional intelligence and grief intelligence all together in learning both how to read that in other people and how to understand in ourselves. And like Pat was showing and like Mary's talking about, becoming wiser about what's going on inside of us, because it's radically affecting us. And if we've been traumatized, it'll radically affect us for a long time. And I found out a few years ago that after my wife died and some other things happened, that I was traumatized not only by that, but it triggered some trauma that had been from my youth onward, from a very dysfunctional, difficult family. And I've gotten help on that. And I'm at a place better than I've ever been in my life, both in terms of understanding what's going on inside of me, but coming to a calm place and working to have to do that so that my tilt meter would be like that. Because I was getting emotionally hijacked all the time, and it affected some relationships I had in a very bad way. So, so I speak out of experience. So this is really what grief intelligence and emotion intelligence helps us to do. And this is a large part of what our manual and our training is to be all about. So you could almost say, by way of analogy, that little t, but Miriam's talking about little t for typical, big T for trauma. Little t could be little tilt, and big T could be big tilt. Because, but once again, it's not so much the shaking that happened, but our response to it. But typical grief responses do throw us off, but we get restored to baseline. But traumatic grief injuries, they stay. They stay shaking for, a long time back and forth. And we become, as Marion gave the definition, there's an impairment of our stress response system. And we become more sensitive and more reactive, perhaps oversensitive and overreactive, we might say. So anyway, Marion's going to continue to help us to understand that. So here we go.
So as you can see from what Pat and Tony told you, a lot goes on inside of us. And one of the things, I'm going to put out a word out to you: mindful. Pay attention to what's going on in your body. That's being mindful. You might not even realize it, but you could be building up these emotions and then have something trigger you, and everything starts to go crazy for you. The traumatic grief injury can result in a loss of power, safety, innocence, and control. It can bring up a variety of emotions very difficult to handle. What can make a traumatic grief injury? A variety of factors, such as distance. How close were you standing during the painful event or situation? Did you witness the event, or did it happen to you? Did your brain react to the event in its dangerous mode, the fight, flight, or freeze as Pat just spoke about? Time span. How long did the event or situation last? Was it repeated? Was it a repeated event which triggered the brain's stress response system each time it occurred? Was there a person involved who betrayed your trust in them? Betrayal is a violation of trust. The more legitimate your claim or belief that you should have been able to trust someone, such as a parent, a family member, a teacher, a clergy, police, etc., the more impactful it would be if they betrayed you and stole that trust from you. We saw that recently when with girls from the gymnastics team testified before Congress, and how the FBI and their own management failed them and didn't react and do anything about the abuse that they were receiving. That's betrayal. When the situation occurred, was it cruel, vicious? It can be a non-violent situation, but still be cruel. Sometimes another person's reaction to the event or the situation can be cruel and vicious too. How unexpected was this situation or the event that occurred? Did you expect something to happen? Were you caught off guard and unable to react the way you wanted to react? Was there a loss to you through the event or the situation? Did someone die because of it? Did you lose something else which was greatly important to you? Maybe some finances, maybe your home, anything. How much personal harm was done to you? It can be physical, psychological, spiritual. How great was the harm to you? Remember, it's how you feel, not what somebody else tells you. It's what you're feeling. Did you feel powerless, not in control, helpless during the situation or the event? Did you witness an event or incident and you were in shock and unable to react the way you believed you should have reacted? Do you feel a society, your family, your neighbors, the community will look upon you in an unfavorable light or as a victim, which isn't the way you want them to see you? As we've noted previously, a traumatic grief injury is unique to each individual because it's not the actual event situation that occurred, it is our internal response to the event or situation that determines what happens going forward. Traumatic grief can be deeply embedded loss to us. It goes back to when the event or situation occurred and how much we want to put it behind us, especially if it caused us shame or embarrassment. We don't want to relive the incident. However, as we discussed earlier, there can be a trigger, an event, a meeting of a person you didn't want or expect to meet, a song, a smell, a sound, and inside we start to feel all the pain and emotions boiling up to the surface. We don't understand what is happening. We just know we're having a flashback to a previous event or situation that was painful. All those memories come flooding back too. These unprocessed memories are powerful in how much they can control us at certain times. This manual gives you a guide to handling the traumatic grief and typical grief. As you go along in this journey, you may want to consult a professional counselor to help you with unprocessed memories. In this manual, there's a section on how to find a counselor meeting your needs. However, it all starts with acknowledging the loss in our life and working through the loss and its effect on us.
Okay, at this time, we're going to take a break like we did last time. And what did we say? Last time we had 7 to 10 minutes or so. So kind of check in everybody after 7 minutes or something, and we'll see where we're at. So, very good. See you back here. I know there's a few cookies left in the other room I saw earlier. And some cold water there, too. And apple cider. There we go. All right. So Pat, you're ready then, right? Okay. Once you,
No, not yet. Well, you can if you want. Okay, let's talk for a moment about feelings. Does the phrase "feel your feelings" perplex you? If so, you are not alone, and you are among friends. For some of us, when we hear that phrase, we come up empty. What does that even mean, we wonder? If you're not sure if this applies to you, think back to your childhood. Did you typically hear things like, "Big girls don't cry," or "Big boys don't cry," or "You're too sensitive"? If so, you may have learned, as so many of us did, to stuff those feelings down. We realized that if we allowed those feelings to surface in any observable way, we would soon be in an even worse position with mom or dad or whoever it was that was scolding us for having a natural reaction of feeling our feelings. The easiest way for us to deal with the challenge of having a feeling but not being allowed to express it was to stop acknowledging, even to ourselves, that we were even feeling anything. We sort of froze them out or stuffed them down, especially the feelings that were unwelcome in the family we grew up in, often the heavier, unpleasant feelings like anger or sadness. And guess what? Stuffing our feelings, freezing them out, was a coping mechanism. And it probably helped us as kids, but it isn't helping anymore. And we can let that go and get in touch with our feelings. If we actually let ourselves feel them, we can use our feelings as signals that there's something wrong, or something amiss, and we can pay attention to it and choose our responses to best solve the problem. In the normal course of things, feelings arise and when felt, just pass through us and are over and done with, kind of like clouds floating by in the sky. Granted, grief itself is not just a cloud floating by, it's its own storm season. But here we're talking about the various feelings, often the heavy ones, that are experienced in everyday life and may well be parts of people's grief experiences. Slide. Some people worry that if they allow a heavy feeling to be felt, they'll get stuck in it. Actually, it seems the opposite is true. It's the feelings that we feel just the edge of and then push away that actually keep us stuck. It's like a feeling keeps knocking at our door and we won't let it have its day and be on its way. If you have any doubts about this at all, consider, as Tina Gilbertson, who's a therapist, has observed, that we don't ever worry about getting stuck in a positive feeling. No one says, if I let myself feel all happy about this promotion or this new relationship, I will be stuck in happiness for the rest of my life. Actually, it might sound appealing to us to feel happy forever, but we know from experience that happy feelings come and happy feelings go. And we always end up back at our normal emotional baseline. Slide. So if you think you have some heavy feelings, and I'm talking about sadness, anger, guilt, fear, shame, humiliation, those kinds of things, and you're afraid that they'll overwhelm you, we urge you to value yourself and invite a trained counselor to help you process them. But we'll assume for now that that's not the case, and let's talk about how to feel a feeling. To feel a feeling, try and get a little time for yourself, to yourself, and sit quietly. Consider briefly a troubling or puzzling situation and how it has made you feel. Call the feeling by its name. It's anger, or it's shame, sadness, fear, whatever it is. Do a bit of a gut check on how valid your feeling is. If you had a good friend whose judgment you respected and they were in a similar situation and they felt the way you feel, would you say that that's on target? If you're still not sure, ask a friend. Run it by them. So we'll say that the feeling is on target. Now just try to feel any physical sensations anywhere in your body as you try to let this feeling arise. This is not the time to analyze the situation further, or to keep reliving it, or to criticize yourself in any way for how you feel or for not being able to think of the right thing to say at that moment. Analyzing may have its place in understanding what happened or what you could do instead if you ever face the situation again, but for now, those things are all just distractions. Probably welcome distractions, because we really don't want to feel those feelings. And we would much prefer to analyze or feel self-righteous. But try to stay focused and just feel whatever sensations you feel. Slide. You will probably be inclined to resist feeling a negative feeling or a heavy feeling because they're unpleasant and because you were brought up not to feel it. But stay with those physical sensations as best you can. A tightness here, a churning there, perhaps you're breathing more rapidly. I notice that when I'm upset, I get really tense in my forearms and my hands. So that's a sign too. Take note of how this emotion feels physically inside you. Slide. And then notice if there's anything beyond or beneath what you're feeling. For example, beneath anger, there's often some hurt or sadness or fear. What might be going on there for you? Consider too, if you are really resistant to fully feeling a particular feeling, that there might be some reason, some benefit to you to keep the situation the way it is. Sometimes folks choose, and I say choose because they don't really think about it, but they choose to stay in an emotionally difficult place because it's what's familiar to them. Feeling angry or sad or whatever is what they're used to feeling. They've been feeling it for so long that it just feels normal to them. Change may seem harder or worse than keeping things the way they are. And addressing the root causes of problems can seem scary. Resolving situations take us out of our comfort zone sometimes. Or perhaps there's a person who's actually getting some attention for feeling or behaving in a certain way, and they like the attention, even if the net effect in their life and in others' lives is a negative one. Refusing to feel an emotion or parking oneself in an emotion are really two sides to the same coin of not dealing with our emotions as well as we could. In a way, though, this is good news because it means improvement is possible and life can get better. When we actually feel our emotions appropriately, they can be signposts as to what is really important in our lives, and we can then act to protect or shore up relationships, or to consider our long-range goals and make sure we don't go off track. Getting better at actually feeling our feelings can tip us off about what we're feeling before we ignore something that we really need to pay attention to, or react in unhelpful ways, flying off the handle when we didn't even realize we were upset. Cultivate this skill of feeling your feelings. It will help you throughout your lifetime. And you will find that when an emotion gets to deliver its message and you deal with the issue, it doesn't hang around for long.
Okay, next slide, please. So, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. What you see up there is from a poem written by the poet and activist Langston Hughes, talking about dreams. And you can almost feel the weight and the heaviness in the word, Remember we spoke from Solomon saying, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hopes and dreams are connected in many ways, aren't they? Dreams deferred, they make the heart sick. They sag, they create a weight. Remember we said grief is like a heaviness. The dictionary definition for sag is to sink downward under weight or pressure or through lack of strength. I love music. The band REM has a song that says, everybody hurts sometimes. So I like to say, everybody sags sometimes. Because I think it's true. Everybody sags sometimes. So we're going to look in a moment to the SAG worksheets and things connected to that in the manual. But I want to tell you first the story behind how the sagging worksheets came about. The use of the word SAG in the building of the worksheet. A 36-year-old friend of mine, was shot by police back in the late 90s down in Georgia. And we believe, meaning his estranged wife at the time and others, we believe that it was what they call an officer-assisted suicide. One of the reasons we believe that is he said before he was going down to Georgia, something to, again, his wife, they were separated, he said, they're going to shoot me down there, so you better, look into this to get money or whatever it was. And then we found out that, they chased him into a field and he reached into his bag and they shot him. So I don't know too much more about the story, but I do know when I heard it hurt inside. And I was asked to do the funeral, as I've had to do many difficult funerals. This was a very difficult one. And as I prepared to do the funeral, I realized that I had three, what you might call competing emotions inside of me, or emotions that had joined forces, so to speak, inside of me, that I was dealing with him. Slide, please. And those three were sorrow, anger, and guilt. Sorrow, anger, and guilt. And I told the gathered mourners there that night, I told them that I was feeling these three things, and my guess that they were too. At least one, maybe two, if not all three of them. And I said, it's like these three are like a molecule that kind of find themselves together. I don't know chemistry real well, but H2O is, two hydrogen, one oxygen, whatever, whatever. And so sorrow, anger, and guilt, like a molecule. So I was feeling sorrow over the loss of a friend. I played pool with him. I shared with him things about spiritual things, and gave his life to the Lord, and around the pool table that he had, and we got to know each other. And he had so much potential in his life. Sorrow he had gotten. I had anger. The anger was that he had fallen back into his drug days and his drug dealing days, and the whole Georgia thing was about drugs, as it turned out. So I had anger, but I also had anger at myself. That, did I do enough? When he was back living in the area before he went down to Georgia, was I spending enough time with him? And that, of course, led to guilt, feeling like I failed him in somehow. And, would he still be alive if I had somehow done something? So those three things were swirling through me. I took some time to process those emotions, and I was feeling my feelings. And identifying them. So that's when I developed these worksheets and began to use them. And then we now put it, in our manual even more so, to identify where the weight was, to identify where that sagging, obviously the SAG, sorrow, anger, and guilt, became another acronym, to sag beneath the weight of that. So I would ask you if you would take out the sheets that we gave you tonight. The first one, it says, and this is, it's really, in the manual, it's really a section unto itself. Learning not to sag, S-A-G, beneath the weight of grief. Again, I'm not going to go through this. You'll have it with you now, but it'll also be in the manual. But, just wanted to take some highlights out of this. Identifying, in a second, it also talks about identifying our anger and guilt, the worksheet. But under sorrow, there are 4 types of experiences that we talk about producing grief. They're kind of different shades. And in the bottom of that, learning not to sag beneath the weight of grief, we kind of list those using marriage as an analogy, saying, one thing is if something that you hoped for, but it never happened, just never happened. And our example was marriage. Somebody said, and again, a lot of people, and I know many people, they don't want to get married, and they've never wanted to, and that's fine. So I'm not making a judgment upon, marriage, but using marriage as an example. But somebody who wanted to get married, but it never happened. There's a grief to that. There's a grief to that. But there's also a grief, number 2 there, is that you always hoped you'd get married. You got married, but it was not a good marriage. It wasn't what you hoped it would be. There's grief in that, right? That's a type of grief. It's different than the other one, isn't it? And then thirdly, people get married, find it satisfying, a good experience, everything they hope for at some level, but something happens that diminishes that. I saw that happen quite a bit when I was involved in, I worked for a place, an Alzheimer's unit for a while, as well as going into those with hospice. And I remember being with a group of parents or daughters or sons, or husbands and wives, rather, of people who were in the unit, and just the sense of the diminishment that there was. Sometimes the person not really recognizing them. They were still alive and still there, but they didn't know who they were. A daughter, anyway, there's a lot of examples. I won't give them, but of what was happening to them. And there's a loss connected to that. And lastly, some people get married, they have many different types of experiences in their marriage, mostly positive, but then their mate dies. They lost. And I know that loss personally. Some of you may as well. To lose your mate. It was a wonderful marriage, but then it did diminish at the end from her illness, and also then the loss. So both of those grief experiences kind of came. So if you'll turn and look at the Identifying My Sorrow, Anger, and Guilt worksheet, looks like this. And this is what we're going to encourage you to not do here tonight, but to take with you and to do as grief work, homework, for next week. We'll bring it back. And we'll give opportunity to share. I really encourage you to do this. But you don't have to share, as we said tonight. You don't have to share. But we want to give that opportunity to share. We had thought before about maybe breaking up into groups and things, but we're not sure if we'll do that or not. But at the very least, like tonight, opportunity for people to share. But if you can see under sorrow there, it basically is structured under those 4 things we just talked about. What I hoped for but never was. Use an example. When I was young, I thought that I was going to be a baseball star, a Major League Baseball star. I always dreamed that, you might put, but it never happened. Never got on a team or never went, whatever. Something that was, but was less for. I hoped for and I received, there, but it wasn't what I had hoped. All the way down the bottom there, you can see. Over in anger. Again, I am angry at Bill, Sue, Janet, Bob. Or at the bottom there, I'm angry at myself. I'm angry at myself for. And just list it. This goes to what Marion and Patton, particular just now, and myself, feel this. Spend some time. Don't do this like on the run. If you get a time to put some time aside, and maybe a quiet time, and just allow that to come. I'm going to encourage you to. I hope you still have in your folder, and if not, we have extra sheets. But your grief experience survey, that could be a help for this. Keep it alongside when you do this, and maybe just take a quick look down that, asking yourself things like, "Oh, that happened. Am I still angry about that? Or how did I feel about that? I lost There's some things on there that really come from this. I was cut from a team, in high school. Some of these are, the worksheets and the survey and all are kind of correlated to be of assistance for doing this grief work, to seek to become more healthy, and to build this as a way to. I created this sheet, as I said, for that time with my friend Dave, who passed. And then, as I told you last week, in 2004, I went to the Journey of Healing, and I started working on the healthy grieving and the GRIEVE. Well, when my wife died in 2017, I 4 days after she passed, I was waking up in the middle of the night. I was right back on the plane where she died, and it just was very tough for me, flashback kind of situations. And the fourth or fifth night, I woke up and I was praying, and I felt God direct me to get out a sheet of paper and to just put the GRIEVE down, and then write down who can, and I wrote down who do I need to invite to journey with me on this, because this is really a tough thing, and I went through a difficult relationship with somebody that ended about a year and a half ago. I got out the SAG sheet and I wrote down about that. The point is, I'm building it into my understanding of the fabric of my mind as I go forward to life. So that's what I'm hoping. That's what we're hoping you'll do. That all of these things in this manual will be not just for a one-time shot thing, but for building them in to your life. Guilt, the last one there. I have or I feel guilt because I did, or I said, or I thought. And you could also, at the bottom it says, I have or I feel guilty, feel guilt because I did not. That sometimes is just as powerful of a thing. And that was my situation with my friend. I kind of felt like maybe there was more I could have done. Maybe there was more I could have done. So, anyway, if you look at the next thing, it says follow up to the SAG worksheet. So what we're going to ask you to do is fill out that worksheet this week. Get yourself some quiet time. Fill out that worksheet. And then with the worksheet right next to you there, read this next section. Because it says there are 4 tasks for lightening grief's load. If we're talking about sagging beneath a weight and sagging between the heaviness, right? Then we want to do what? We want to release that. And what can lighten that load? Well, and we're going to talk about 4 tasks to do that. And tonight I just want to introduce those. But then also there are 4 things that help with those tasks. We didn't give you those sheets, but that we'll talk about next week, which goes into getting support, prayer, counseling, journaling. We'll go into more detail for that next week. But we just want to mention these 4. They are forgiveness, celebrating, being grateful, and letting go. And Pat's going to speak a little bit tonight about forgiveness because it's maybe the most critical of them.
So let's look at forgiveness because it's probably the hardest of the tasks and the most misunderstood. So let's look at what forgiveness is and what it's not. Lots of us would say that forgiveness is a thing that happens between people that restores a relationship to what it was before some breach occurred. We further think that when we forgive something, we are basically saying, I'm okay with what you did, as though the grief injury that happened didn't matter or count for anything. Neither of these is entirely accurate. The clearest definition for forgiveness that I've heard is one by Lewis B. Smedes, who was a theologian who said effectively that forgiveness is a willingness to live with the scales unbalanced. A willingness to live with the scales unbalanced. You never have to be okay with what happened. It just means you've chosen not to retaliate and cause further pain. Many cultures, including ours, place a certain value on retaliation. But when we do that, I think we're making a mistake. Forgiving, refusing to retaliate, is saying to the one who hurt you, what you did was awful. I don't want to get sucked into this awfulness. I want no connection to it at all. Think how much suffering and pain happen because a cycle of retaliation continues. In any situation like this, you have more power than you think. You may not have started it, but you can stop it. It takes a lot more strength to stop and step away than it does to get carried along by the tide of anger and the urge to get even. And it puts you in control of the situation. Another thing, let's not confuse retaliation with seeking legal justice for something that was illegal. Justice is important, and letting someone off the hook isn't necessarily good for them or for the people that they may go on to harm. Another confusing situation that crops up regarding forgiveness is where we have trouble forgiving someone even though we want to, and so we just don't have that feeling of release that often comes with forgiving. Flora Slauson-Vollner, who's a pastor and an author, said this about that. If you feel like you want to forgive someone in your heart, but you just don't feel like you can or that you have likely already forgiven them, and what you're actually feeling is a wound, or in our terms, a traumatic grief injury. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you won't still feel pain. Traumatic grief injuries really are that. They're injuries. And we all know how long an injury can take to heal, maybe even a lifetime. Healing is a journey. Give it the time it deserves. And let's clear this up too. The choice to forgive and the choice to return to a normal relationship are really two different matters. Returning to a normal relationship is about reconciliation. If you've been badly hurt by someone and the trust that was there is no longer there, it's not wise to jump right back into that relationship because your chances of being hurt again are very high. I'm not saying that trust can't ever be rebuilt. It often can be rebuilt. But proceed very carefully if you even want to reconcile, and especially so if you're being pushed or pressured to reconcile. And consider strongly getting professional guidance in that situation. Remember, value yourself.
Okay, so we're not going to go over grateful or celebrate or letting go. We're going to go over those next week, as we have opportunity to, if anyone has things that they might share. Because if you can see there, it's like another worksheet. Because in that worksheet, like you fill out there, I need to ask forgiveness from so-and-so at the bottom of the one page. And on the other page, be grateful, I am grateful for, or I celebrate, or I need to let go of. So fill that out, please, and then bring that back next week, and we'll spend some time, and we'll share from our own experience a little bit on that, and then we'll work also going a little further on that. Okay, so we've come to our closeout time. And so just want to, quick summary of the grief work for this next week then. So really encourage you to, if you didn't do the healthy grieving goals, I would encourage you to go back to that. You may not have had time this week, but spend some time with that. But especially this week, do your the SAG worksheet, fill that out, and then the lightning grease load, go on with that information next to you. Go on and fill that out again. And, I encourage you again to take your grief experience survey and keep that out there as well. That'll help. Next week, we'll look over those and discuss those a little more. And once again, no one will have to share if they want to. And I also would like to say, by way of what we started out at the beginning tonight, is that if you haven't done it already, be thinking about who you might want to sit down. Now, I know we mentioned next week we're going to come and, share, but that's just maybe a one thing you throw out if you feel comfortable. But who might you want to sit down and share this across a table with, or, in a chair, in a room, who might be the person you might want to journey with you? So keep that in mind as you work on the worksheets. Lastly, want to do is redeem myself for what I forgot to do last week, because when I went up to close, I forgot to bring up my sheet that had. So in your workbook, in your blue book, you see the evaluation sheet. So that would really be, helpful. That, in fact, if you have a couple minutes or a minute or so to do that now, and just leave it, we would appreciate that. You don't have to sign that, but it would actually at this point be sessions 1 and 2, But if you would fill that out and leave it with us. This is our first time doing this seminar. For those of you that are online, if anyone's still there, hello. Sorry that it may not have really worked out as we might have thought in the beginning. We'd hope we might be able to Zoom, which would make more for a back and forth situation, but we weren't able to get that together. But hopefully this has been helpful to you, and stay with us and come back next week. But we will tell you that, for those of you who come, we'll get the manual to you. But those of you, we're going to, work with Pastor Dan this week, and we're going to talk about how to get the manuals to the people that are at home. So we'll make sure you get that. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully this was helpful. And we'll see you next week, same place, same time. Have a great week. God bless you. Bye-bye.